So here we are at the end of what is this? The beginning, middle of July, and the end of a really hot couple of weeks. So we're at the opposite end, I guess, what I was going to say, of the cold stuff that we suffer all winter, and we're all sweltering today in northern New England. Very near God's country, except I was born in Colorado, and it's hardly possible to call this God's country once you're born in a place like the mountains of Colorado. I'm in a video today. I'm in a discussion today that I truly am loath to do, but I really want to get it out of the way. And some of these points, some of these issues that are brought up to me, and I don't mean it to dismiss you personally, but it circles around the idea of talking about individuals who are painters, and especially good painters from the past, or painters that work differently from me, that many of you actually consider in the class of God. Somebody said one of these guys I'm about to talk about is the American Michelangelo, and the other guy is one of the great masters. And these kinds of things put me in a category of being, as somebody said about me talking about Schmid, being this party who wants to tear somebody down. I don't have any instinct to do that, but the only reason I'm actually talking about these, I found a reason that's bigger than talking about these guys to talk about. And the reason is, and this conversation came up also, well, there are two other points to this, by the way. One is somebody asked me to talk about the new realism that I refer to from time to time. Can I talk about it more? And again, I don't want to talk about anything like that to pick on somebody as much as I'd like to talk about some aspects of it to keep you from harm, so to speak, if I'm right, or if you're trying to go the direction I'm going, well, you might want to do something different. But the bigger reason, though, what this really gives me is an opportunity to talk about this major issue that came up under Gamel, and that is the issue of breadth. What is breadth? Gamel will talk about breadth, and versus elaboration comes with a discussion from Ang. So elaboration versus breadth in drawing and painting, right? What is that? What is that thing? So I think these examples of these modern works give you an example of the elaboration model. And then I'll go ahead and show you Boston School and some other people, and a lot of other people, strong players in the other direction, and give you an idea what the breadth model looks like. But what you're going to see, and we may as well show it to you now. I'm showing you Claudio Bravo and Nelson Shanks. The one in the upper left is Bravo, and I'll show you some others of his a little bit later. And Shanks is the other pumpkin one, the one on the right, and then down below. So, and in both cases, you can see this amazing degree of nuanced detail in little things. Like this linen looks like linen, it looks like stitch counting. And similar things are happening in these areas here in this Shanks, and down in the leg here, and in the side of this. This is the stuff that we've always thought the Fool of the Eye painting was made out of. Well, I think it's actually different from that today. These guys, I don't really think they're trying to fool your eye as much as they're trying to be realists, right? I think they want to be the cutting edge realists. And that model of realism is so close to the Fool of the Eye representational painter, that some of them just appear to be doing that. It's real things. It's real things and stuff. There is a different model, and I'm going to spend time talking about it. The other model, of course, is the one that we were encouraged to follow by Gamel, and the larger thinking that he was connected to. So the larger body of thinking that he was connected to. So here's who they're like, though. I pulled up a bunch of other ones. I decided I'd just settle on these Harnets. And I remember looking at a couple of really beautiful Harnets in the museum I think they have a nice one in Boston, but I think New York may have one or two better ones. And I remember looking at this and wondering about it, and wondering what my place in the world is in relation to this kind of work. But I think these are models of either the new realism, for the new realist, or they are simply part of that genre, and they're referred to as being part of that genre today of Trompe, Fool of the Eye. But if you look at these things, you'll find the same proximal, immediate accuracy, the stains on the walls, the tininess of detail in a wall, all for the sake of realism, right? And so they're elaborate with this kind of detail. And as I said, that seems to be the new model, to see how far you can look in, whereas the old model was don't look in. So DeCamp said, don't look past the picture plane. And he's talking about zooming in with your eyes and seeing little or little. And it's funny, one of my visiting students showed me a video or something of a guy using this little teeny lens, so he actually hold it up to his eye and zoom in on the littlest details, like the wings, the particles on the wings of a fly or something like that. Very different model, though, just to say the least. So I'm showing you the guy who has the history of being the great, and for most people should really probably be the great still life example. He was a good composer, a good painter, and he was big and he was visual. So he's, as you've run into before, I'm showing you Chardin. He's part of that model, the Boston School model. But he's also part of the grand visual model. It's not a limited thing to impressionists or something. But this idea of maintaining the relative unity to the eye, and not just showing the realism of each object separately, at least in the relation to still life, you could argue almost begins right here with Chardin. And I say it only because it begins with him in the sense that he was a still life painter. So yeah, there's a nice example. So just the opposite of the zooming in model of either this guy or these guys with all this infinity of fineness, in fine, little, tiny, every little thing drawn with nuance and time, and the times, putting the time in, almost like that was the, America's model. What is that? Workaholic model, So I brought you early Velázquez, because he did these kinds of things up to a point. He rather did that in his earliest phase. And there's an argument made by some, like Joseph DeCamp, that this is a reasonable model for a student. Can you at least do this well? Get up this level of representation, manage the stuff it takes to make that. And you can see that he still stays broad, though, in his interpretation of form. It's not looked into. It's not piecemeal either. It tends to be quite big, and the unities are more important than the parts. But there's another model, and that's Caravaggio. And I do think that a significant part of the new realism comes out of Caravaggio, and almost arguably this still life right here. This looks like what they're all aiming at, and more than anything else I've seen in the history of art. And I doubt that they're aiming at what Harnett is doing. I think it's probably that model. And there again, you can see these tiny, tiny little plums and things with 1,000 shifts of color, nuanced surfaces, all sorts of things in a very, very finely managed, piecemeal way. By the way, not that anybody's work winds up being absolutely piecemeal. I mean, you'd probably change it if it looked really piecemeal, but the way of working is multiplicity of parts. So here's the, I think the bottom left. But I bring these because I think it's self-conscious. It looks like he's Bravo. These are all Bravo. These two are Bravo. He's self-consciously trying to do some of Velázquez's thing. You can see that he comes up with a different model on multiple levels. There's a considerably less, if any, lost and found of any kind. And I'm talking about soft turning. Everything seems to be found in a more academic kind of a way. Outline seems to be quite crucial, but it's just the piecemealness these figures hold together is just so much better. And I'm just saying that's sort of inevitable. About Bravo, he says about himself that he started his painting up in the left corner and went down toward the right so he wouldn't get it dirty, and finishing as he went. And that's certainly not the Impressionist model that Velázquez gives us later, or certainly the one that virtually everybody worked with eventually, where your idea is to be all over the place at once in the start. So here again is the Mars is in Chicago. It's a delightful piece, really amazing piece of work by Velázquez. And you can see the difference in the attention when you get to any spot on this thing. There's not this thing where he just settles down and just does a thing for its own sake, which these do rather feel like. So, but as I said, there's this accuracy of detail and featuring in the small as well as the big that seems to be the occupation of this way of working. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure if it's the photograph, the era of the photograph we live in, that causes that to happen. So you have pictures. I don't know. I have no reason to believe that Bravo worked from photographs. But I think it's really gotten into our blood. That when it's accurate is when it's like a high resolution photograph where the photographer set it down there and just let it sit until it take it in every detail. And that's like the final frontier of representational painting or something. So, but here again, there's Titian, and you can see again this tendency to the big, not to little, not to fine, and not to, and I say fine, not for fine for its own sake, and not to the nth degree of fineness. Take an arm like this, and that's as beautiful a piece of realism as you can see anyplace. And yet it doesn't have that same quality. It's a different quality. It's bigger, and the overall picture is the point. There are passages like this face where you can easily see that there's a lesser treatment, if you want to call it that, a broader treatment still. It's true there are some oddities, like this has the feeling, so does that, of having been hung on a mannequin and then painted up without a context. But frankly, he probably didn't have a context for much of this. How many did 5 people stand around in the room and while he painted? There's some interesting questions about any of that. And again, I wanted to mention that, so the breadth of this thing, and a lot of people, there's this discussion going on about form and the idea of pushing form and getting all out of the form. And I think that's the realist model as well, forcing the form to do realism instead of just to be a form player and write to the other forms. And there is a difference, which I can't tell you any more about, except the idea of focusing on little things for their own sake. And the question is, well, can you do it and not have it be at the expense of the whole? And so here's the hands by Mona Lisa. And I'm showing you those because they are broadly painted, even though here's a guy who actually shows you how to articulate carefully all the lids of the eye and all that sort of thing. And yet he's got this broad, very broad treatment, not a looked into, finessed minutia treatment, where his model is clearly not realism in anything like the way that the new realist generation is doing. And then even more stunning is this. I mean, this is broad painting at its most broad. And this is even with a guy who's doing the detail, so to speak, on maps. Little stuff in tapestries, and the details here, I've shown you this up here. This guy actually knows how to paint and stop when he's done the right amount for the level of for the eye, right? Now, the argument actually could be that was delivered to him in that camera obscura, so he actually had that sense of you can't this far, no farther, because the lens would have given him some limits. But in each of these areas of detail, and I'm actually trying to do these because of the little bit of still life type thing, this here, say this over here, you're seeing this, there's no urgency to get in there and create realism. Do you see that? So what is that? It's accurate shapes in every possible way as representation work works, but it's actually broadly expressed where there's not this desire to get in and produce something exotically real and tangible, but in fact to enjoy the lost and the found, the world of contrasts, right, versus the world of realism, the world of blue talking to blue versus the world of chairs. Just that difference. How much more beautiful does it get? And again, I'm bringing you back to this just for a second because I want you to remember what we're comparing it to. So, and you could say, well, it's not fair. Well, it depends on what you say about these guys. If you consider them to be gods in this world, I always suggest that you reserve. Hey, by the way, reserve judgment is what I was going to say. But I was one of these guys who thought both of these guys were really special. We're doing something. When I was young, because they were there when I was in school. They were out there making names for themselves, and it was a question of what they had, But you got to know more before you understand what they have. But once you understand the difference between this and or once you get some understanding about what the nature of this is, then that doesn't have the same charm at all, and they have very little in common. and I am talking about that tiny noodling for its own sake. It isn't you'd never run into any of that, but it wouldn't be done in this way of almost trying to prove that you could do something that nobody's ever done or something like that. And then here's a Leighton, and this is all about breadth, right? The forms are broad. I mean, he's probably as broad a painter as ever existed. And so I'm showing you these because there's a bunch of still lifes here, all of which are very, broadly expressed, not carefully noodled up. You can't get realism out of these guys. You can't get it. You can get form out of them. You can get the distance back out of them. You can get all this stuff, but you can't get realism out of these things. It will not satisfy you that way. Nothing about his work will. You get the closest he gets is this, but in fact, realism, it doesn't fit. It's a different model. Even in this one, which is so finely articulated in these, the fine parts of the drapery and that sort of thing, it doesn't come to that same place. It doesn't look like the same motive. Look at the breadth of the expression of the form in that head. And we're not looking in to see anything that's, sort of local to the girl. It's all about, even though every part is accurate, it's about bigger things. And typically painters stop with the bigger things because there are way bigger things even than the bigger things of form. There are way bigger things you're doing, which is stuff related to the entire rectangle, and it's far more important than the details of realism. So there's Chardin back a little bit. I wanted to show you not just a school one, but one of the most beautiful still lifes in Western art, the upper left one. And both these have their enormous charm. But but this again is a question. You can look at this thing in this area here, and it really begins to look like he's going to go in there, but he actually doesn't. And you can see by the time he gets done that his game wasn't realism. He just needed this center to be strong and to do its job. So yeah, what more can I say about that? Big form, just like Leighton, big emphasis on the big. And what Degas once said was, work along the broad lines, make a frontal attack on the main lines, where that would be the big forms. Make your attack there, and and he makes further critiques. So showing you again the difference between this look, where you can see the quietness, the repose of these, and sort of the aggressive. The aggressive realism. It's one of the things I always wonder about with people with really, what I call really good eyes. Do their eyes ever get to rest? Those of us who are nearsighted, we're resting most of the time. We have to work hard to see anything like this. And that could be an argument against my observations. But in fact, if it weren't for the history of Western art not agreeing with this look, but actually having its own different way of being, the model is a big model for great art. And artists everywhere who've spoken about this thing use the same expression. You talk about breadth, and they compare it with the idea of elaborating more and more levels of detail. They contrast it with that. None more than Degas. So I'm showing you these. Degas was as fine a draftsman as existed, and these articulations without little tiny modulations for the sake of surface realism. These are exquisite examples of what we're talking about in both the hand and the face. And here's a guy even using really fine lines like Bravo likes to use, very sharp-edged things. And yet, look at what he's doing here. Or look at the specks in the hat and the way he's handling the hair. This guy actually does visual painting. He's a visual painter. He's not interested in realism. He's interested in visual impression in his own way of getting there. Which is so close, this stuff here and this way of treatment is so close to the Boston School. Most people don't even think of it that way. But again, great forms, great organization of the forms within the abstraction. That's Degas. But nothing in here is where you start counting hairs or eyelashes or anything like that. That's not broad treatment. That's something else that has its own sort of, I would say, ulterior motive, but that again sounds a little too judgmental. And I say ulterior doesn't mean you're a bad guy. It just means your motive isn't as big as the music of painting would want it to be, as the pure aesthetic. Realism is its own aesthetic, if you want to put it that way. When I'm not sure aesthetic is the right word for realism, however pretty the object. But yeah, I'm getting into it in a way that will give me all the wrong responses here. But what I wanted to show you the bottom one for here, though, is because this is a superb example of detail-free realism, little mark-free realism, great forms and great form play, great color play. This is where the music comes. This is music, guys. This one up here to a far the Madame Gaugelin to a far lesser degree. This one to an even lesser degree. As he's processing all the stuff that all through life, he's getting more and more to pure music, and I'm talking about the music of the visual. So he's talking form games, playing to forms. See these lines going this way across here, how they're picking up back over here, they're here. I mean, this is a system of the stuff that makes the music in visual painting. Just as much as the color design, just as much as this red going to this red to this red, these red. They watch the play of these reds into each other. Form play, busy play, line play, verticals, whatever it is. So you understand, though, that he's right here. He's a model of isolating the point of painting. And this is where I suggest to you that realism doesn't get to go. You maybe think in some theory it could. I used to think that, but I don't think it can. Now, if you work our way, you can work from this, as I've expressed before, from a lay-in like this, and have a motive at some point of getting into higher and higher levels of fine articulation, fine drawing, like I've done in copying Paxton's The New Necklace. And at that, and at any point of further detail you want to go. But one thing is for sure that you will have won over and over again in terms of the big impression, unless you're just making a copy for somebody that needs to be exactly like what the Paxton, which I had to do. But by the time you get to that level of realism, you'll have exhausted yourself. You'll already have won the game 8 ways to Sunday. If you've already way down here won at the game of visual play, and you've made music out of the color schemes and all those things, you've already won so much that what is realism going to give you that you don't already have? Which is the conclusion of a lot of Boston School painters. To be satisfied, according to Valery, he said, Degas wished that his work be complete not by the perfection of its detail, but through the final harmonious effect. You've heard me quote this before. He looked for unity, first of all, in construction and in the coordination of the various elements comprising the painting. Those are the things I was showing you down there, including, for example, color relations. The proper synthesis between drawing, values, and color. So that's in the next level, So what is the role of drawing in a picture like this? And what is that part there is it's sort of a generalized statement you'd find from an art analyst. The proper synthesis. Everything we do is the proper synthesis between drawing, values, and color. Even a realist would tell you that, in a sense, they're doing that. But what we're talking about with this guy is this whole idea that it's about visual harmonies, harmony of the visual, harmony of the stuff visual. And by the way, harmony of, once you put people in, it's harmony of the play of people too. It's the timing between individuals sitting in the room and that sort of thing. So there's every kind of sort of ways of getting at relationals that you must get at. Anyway, all right, so let's just give you the Boston School and exit. Here's Joseph DeCamp. And again, here you're seeing one of the most stunning pictures at the Museum of Fine Arts. Not that I've always found that line gashing through the middle of the horizontal line a satisfying thing in this picture. And I think it puts off most people. There's something squaring up about this thing. It isn't satisfying. But we're talking now about about this idea of articulating the wall and showing where the nail holes are and that sort of thing. No, we're not talking about it, are we? Even where we're articulating and working up the dress, we're not going and going. We're going to the level of significant play. So this whole idea of breadth, it has to do with significant things. We don't put things in that are insignificant, and we express them as broadly as we can so that we're not just there making a realism thing here and a realism thing there that takes over the purpose of its being there. Again, here you're seeing the very beautifully broadly expressed hands, very broadly expressed hands. This doesn't look like realism, does it? It's a very different model. And the same with Tarbell. There's no effort to count everything on these draperies. The major masses are there doing the right things, and they allude to the drapery in a more than adequate way. I don't know which one of these is actually. I think somewhere between these two coloristically is the truth. This one looks too gray, and this one looks a little too colored. But so what these guys are spending their time doing, this is a wonderful example at the Museum of Fine Arts. There's a what we call a pendant set. There are two pictures virtually the same tonality and sort of what would you call that? Pensive mood, quiet mood of a woman here and between women in the other one. But what you're seeing here is the abstract play of these darks in a field, right? And that kind of thing isn't about realism. There's the need for realism. If you've won already, if the music is happening in this abstract way from across the room, the rest of it is just give me the rest of what you have to give me. But realism will eat your lunch if you're doing this kind of painting, and suddenly you get up there and all this is realism. It'll smack you in the eye and do something offensive to your aesthetics, sensibilities. So here, and even Paxton is doing it. So here I'm giving you the line guy, essentially sort of the academic of the Boston School background. And again, no sense of detail for its own sake. Everything is done. And he's possibly the guy who expressed this himself. And I would think it comes out of Jerome's training. There's nothing in the work of Jerome that ever is in this category of this new realism that's happening today. And not in Paxton either. He's not into doing the littleness of anything to prove that he can, or as if he thought it was some new aesthetic model. You could say they're doing it by the book, but actually, right in front of these guys were people like Harnett and those guys doing their whatever you want to call that, hyper-realism and their Trompe stuff, you know. So it wasn't like they didn't have those models in front of them. So my point here today was just to try to get you to walk through with me and see if you could see the difference by comparing back and forth between broadly painted pictures, which are most of these, and detail-oriented realism, which is a different animal. And detail-oriented being just like Degas said, you know, where the idea of finishing the picture is like how much realism, how much finesse of the literal can you bring to a picture. And so you want to get to the point where you realize that that's going to undercut the mission. And so, as I said, I'm not interested in picking on anybody. I think we're all in this together. All of us have had our chairs kicked out from under us in terms of trying to become painters. So we're all having to sort our way through this with more or less background. I mean, it's amazing how little good information there was for us. And it was a miracle. Gamble himself was a bit of a miracle. I consider myself to have been fortunate in the nth degree. Because he had a connection with these guys who used these words. So for the rest of you who don't have it, though, make sure you do the reading and read good painters and what they say. Don't read what people say about painting. Don't read books on how to paint. Read good painters, people you respect their work, and see if you can find quotes from them. And you will find enough of this gold here to take you the rest of the way, or to at least keep you out of the ditch, or at least out of the ravine. Ditches are in some ways good because you learn lessons, but okay. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope I haven't offended anybody who in the realist world or any of the Bravos and Shankses of this world. It wasn't my intention to, but just really here to show you two different ways of thinking about painting, and one historically the more dominant, and it's up to you to decide if you really think it's not the more important, ultimately, aesthetically speaking. Anyway, so go ahead and share, comment, subscribe as usual, and so on and so forth. Thank you for your nice comments about the last couple. I appreciate that very much. I was worried about those big heavy-handed things we did in that interview. But thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.